What's up, guys? Welcome to this week's episode of Best Bets for UFC Fight Night. Anthony Hernandez versus Sean Strickland, where I'll be discussing the most confident picks, the lock of the week, the underdog of the week, and some parlays that I like. Let's dive into the most confident picks, where we got Carly Judice, Jocelyn Edwards, and Alden Correa. Starting off with Carly Judice. She's one of the most technical strikers in the division. Sharp teep kicks up the middle, knees up the middle, accurate boxing, and real power behind her shots. She fights well at range and can also scrap in the pocket if she needs to. Most opponents, they struggle to hold her down, and she's hard to control for long periods of time, which is why she's such a big favorite. Juliana Miller, her opponent, she's coming off of a big win as an underdog, but against lower level competition. Her path to victory, it's wrestling, pushing Judice up against the fence, securing takedowns, and racking up control time. However, it won't be easy against someone as difficult to hold down as Judice. If this stays on the feet, which it likely will, Judice should clearly win the striking exchanges with cleaner, more damaging strikes. Unless Miller can consistently control her on the ground, Judice's striking and defensive awareness will give her the edge here. Moving on to Jocelyn Edwards versus Nora Cornell. This is a rematch from 2023 where Nora Cornell won by decision, but there's a real argument that Jocelyn Edwards actually deserved to win that fight. In their first fight, Edwards landed multiple takedowns and controlled her for large portions of that fight, of the first 2 rounds, only for Cornell to finish the rounds on top for the last 30 seconds. Many felt the scoring could have gone either way, but if you watch that back, Edwards clearly won the fight, in my opinion, at least. I think they gave it to Cornell because it was in France, and Cornell was making her debut, and she's French. So, yeah, since then, Edwards has clearly leveled up. She's more aggressive, more confident, and riding a 3-fight finishing streak, including a sharp first-round knockout last time out versus Priscilla Cachoeira. And her striking, it's looked cleaner, right? And she's fighting like a hunter now, and she's not someone just trying to survive in there. She's clearly leveled up. Cornell still relies on forward pressure, but she's shown vulnerabilities to be taken down and controlled. As seen in her last fight with Caro Rosa. If Edwards mixes her improved striking with her grappling advantage, she has a strong path to victory here. Whether by landing cleaner shots on the striking, or just dominating with takedowns this time around. Moving on to our last most confident pick, Alden Correa. I correctly predicted both Correa and Gurul in their last fights. I said Alden Correa would win as a big plus 400 underdog in his last fight, and I faded Louis Gurul as a 2-1 favorite. Correa, he impressed me on the regional scene with well-rounded skills, sharp technical striking, and strong footwork with solid composure. He carried that into his UFC debut, securing a 3rd-round TKO, and showed real maturity in his game. His jab, his movement, and his overall game, it stands out. Meanwhile, Gurul, he struggled in his debut and hasn't shown enough power or striking threat to consistently set up his wrestling. Since he relies on takedowns but doesn't dominate the striking, it could be tough for him to implement his game plan here. Overall, Correa's cleaner striking and improved confidence coming into this matchup, it gives him the edge, and he even has the ability to mix in takedowns himself if needed here. So that concludes the most confident picks for this card. Moving on to the lock of the week. Former underdog of the week turns into lock of the week. Yadir Del Valle proved the hype was real when he cashed big as a big underdog against Aizen Dalgarian. Now he's 2-0 in the UFC with 2 first-round finishes, brings relentless striking, pressure, heavy kicks, and a legit submission threat. And he's hungry. If the fight extends, his cardio has held up well enough to maintain the aggressive pace that he puts out. Jordan Levitt, on the other hand, in my opinion, he isn't truly a high-level fighter. He relies heavily on getting fights to the ground and tends to struggle against stronger competition. He'll likely try to use his awkward striking to set up takedowns, but Del Valle's pressure and power could force him into desperate shots from the distance. Overall, if Del Valle can keep this fight standing or scramble effectively, which I think he will be able to do both, he should land the more damaging shots and control the pace. His power, his volume, and his durability, it gives him the edge in a high-tempo fight. So moving on to underdog of the week, Uros Medic. I've been riding with Uros Medic. I've been riding with Uros Medic uh, and for his last two fights, and it's paid off. He bounced back from that 30-second knockout loss to Soriano with two brutal first round knockouts in identical fashion, right? The Soriano loss came from a technical mistake against a heavy hitter, but against guys without that kind of power, Medic's sharp sniping style, it always thrives. Now against Jeff Neal, you expect this to be a striking battle. Neal is a clean boxer, but he can be patient and selective, right? Medic, on the other hand, I think he'll be faster, active with his jab and leg kicks, and dangerous with those sudden blitzes down the middle. If Medic manages distance, uses his footwork, and picks his moments, I see him landing the bigger, more impactful shots in a primarily stand-up fight, giving him the edge in these exchanges, right? So moving on to the parlay section. Starting off with the safety lock, Yadir Del Valle and Jocelyn Edwards. Yadir Del Valle coming in with pressure, power, finishing instinct. Jordan Levitt, he's going to want to grapple. But if he can't control early, which I don't think he will, Yadir's striking and volume and damage should take over the fight. Pairing him up with Jocelyn Edwards, who arguably won the first fight in this rematch with Cornell. She's more aggressive, more confident, and she still has the wrestling edge if needed here. Coming for revenge, this is a solid safety lock at minus 150. It's safe, but not chalky. So I think it's solid safety lock. Moving on to the ultimate lock, Yadir and Correa. This one is sneaky clean. I already believed in Alden Correa since before he came into the UFC. He proved me right. His striking is sharper than Gurul's, and Gurul struggles to impose wrestling if he's losing the striking exchanges. Pairing him up with Yadir gives you two guys with clear superiority in the striking and just better finishing upside. Moving on to affordable juice, Mel Costa and Delija at plus 155. Now we're cooking. Melquiz Costa, he's dangerous everywhere. Dan Ige, yes, he is tough, but Costa's aggression and finishing ability make him live in every exchange. Pairing him up with Ante Delize, as a heavyweight, one clean shot can flip everything. Spivak, he's more of a grappler, and he can grapple, but Delize just has that I just need one shot to land clean power, and he has volume on top of that as well. So it's plus money with real knockout potential for both guys. I see it happening. Moving on to the four most confident picks parlay. Yadir, Edwards, Correa, and Judice. Yadir coming in with the pressure and damage. Edwards coming in with her size and grappling edge. Correa with just sharp boxing and just a better all-round game. And Carly Judice, one of the cleanest strikers on the card. None of these rely on luck. All of them have clear stylistic edges. And a four-leg at plus 160, it's pretty controlled risk here. Moving on to the fun duo parlay. Alibi Idris and Carlos Leal at plus 220. It's a fun duo parlay. Carlos Leal, he's throwing heat every time he gets in the cage. Chidi Njuku Wani, his opponent, he can get caught. If this becomes a firefight, Leal is live to just back him up and throw more powerful shots. With pairing him up with Alibi Idris, who has that chaotic, jittery energy. Ode, he can be too hesitant at times, and Idris, he'll just look more flashy and will just throw more volume in this matchup, in my opinion. So it's a good parlay for a smaller stake. Now we're entering the big boy odds. The plus 400 for Underdog City, Uros Medic and Ramiz Brahimaj. Uros Medic, he's a sniper. If it's mostly a striking battle with Neal, he can absolutely have the bigger moments. Pairing him up with Ramiz Brahimov, if he can get the grappling, he's dangerous. He's got a submission threat that's real. And on top of that, his striking has looked so smooth lately. So you're betting on chaos here and finishing upside. And at plus 400, it's worth a sprinkle. Just don't put your house on it, right? Moving on to, that does conclude the best bets for this card. Hope you guys found this helpful. Till next time, peace.